The squad car's lights strobed across my old barn like it was the climax of a crime show instead of a Tuesday evening. 2 officers crouched behind their open doors, hands on holsters, shouting into a bullhorn. "Step away from the illegal structure and put the tool down," they commanded. Inside the taped-off perimeter, under a floodlight, I calmly finished tightening a bolt on my brand-new, fully permitted grain silo. I didn't look scared. I looked mildly annoyed. On the gravel driveway, HOA President Lynette Harlow vibrated with self-righteous energy, arms folded, wedge sandals planted in my great-grandfather's tire tracks. Her laminated HOA badge glowed in the cruiser's lights like some cursed amulet. "He's been warned," she shrilled to the sergeant. "He refused to comply with the architectural committee. This is a direct violation of our sightline covenants." The sergeant squinted at the farmhouse, at the pasture, at the faded Crow family farm established 1924 sign. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this is clearly a farm." "That used to be a farm," Lynette snapped. "It's now part of Maple Ridge Estates Phase 2. He doesn't get special treatment just because his ancestors were here first." I flipped a switch on my porch. Every single one of my high-definition security cameras swiveled to face the officers and the HOA crowd. A small red light on a legal notice taped to the porch post blinked. "Audio and video recording in progress," it read. "By entering, you consent." I wiped my hands on a rag, walked to the edge of my property line, and raised my voice just enough. "Sergeant," I called, "before you step onto my land, you'll want to read that court order you were served this morning." The sergeant frowned, hand going to his chest pocket. Lynette smiled in brittle triumph, until he unfolded the paper and his expression changed. He read it twice. Then he looked at me with dawning horror, at the cameras, at the line of HOA board members crowding his bumper. "Ah, hell," he muttered. "We just walked into a setup." I shrugged. "Not a setup," I said. "A trap. Legal distinction. My lawyer said that matters." 6 months earlier, I had 3 items on my vision board. Get my 100-year-old family farm back before developers ground it into cul-de-sacs. Fix the leaking roof on the barn. Be left completely, utterly alone. I was 34, quiet, and had the sort of patient stare you only get from spending a decade in IT customer support listening to adults claim the internet is broken. I wore flannels without irony and preferred tractors to group chats. The Crow farm sat at the edge of Riverside County, where cornfields had been steadily replaced by amenity-rich communities with names like Fox Hollow Reserve and the cottages at Cedar Creek, none of which contained foxes, cottages, or anything resembling a creek. My grandparents had been forced to sell most of their acreage in the late 90s to pay medical bills. The land flipped, then reflipped, until a developer carved out Maple Ridge Estates. 220 houses, ornamental trees, and an HOA with a 60-page handbook and the soul of a parking ticket. But the core homestead, the original farmhouse, barn, and 10 acres, had stayed in the family. Barely. When my uncle's gambling debts nearly took even that chunk, I drained my savings, cashed out my retirement, and bought it from him. I showed up at closing with a cashier's check and a folded black-and-white photo of my great-grandfather standing in front of the same barn. The title company rep slid the keys over. "Congratulations," she said. "You're now the proud owner of Crow Farm." She hesitated, then added that I was technically a non-participating agricultural neighbor to Maple Ridge Estates. "Non-participating sounds perfect," I said. "I'm very talented at not participating." I moved in the next day. By the end of week 1, I met Lynette. She appeared on my porch unannounced, perfectly highlighted white blonde bob, yoga pants, and a binder thick enough to stun an ox. "I'm Lynette Harlow," she said, "president of the Maple Ridge Estates HOA. And you are a bit of a problem." "Name's Daniel," I said, "and I live here." She gave my work boots a disapproving once-over. "Our community prides itself on cohesion and visual harmony," she explained. "When buyers see your rustic structures, it can negatively impact perceived property values." I glanced at the barn, weathered and crooked and stubbornly still standing. "That's 100 years of visual harmony right there," I replied. "We're willing to be reasonable," she said. "Our board has drafted an integration plan. You can submit all changes to your property for architectural review. In exchange, we allow you access to community amenities. I have a field, a creek, and no neighbors right on top of me, I said. I think I'm good on amenities. She colored. Sir, you don't seem to understand how this works. Oh, I do, I said, leaning on the porch post. You're the HOA. I'm the guy who isn't in your HOA. That's how this works. Her smile tightened into a warning. We'll see, she said. HOA Karen energy is like mold. If you see a little, there's a lot more behind the wall. First came the letters. A courtesy notice informing me that visible farm machinery was disruptive to the community aesthetic. A request for cooperation asking me to cease the use of heavy equipment between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. because some residents like to enjoy their back decks without tractor noise. A printed page titled Community Dumpster Etiquette, even though my dumpster sat half a mile from their nearest postage stamp yard. Each one came on letterhead that said Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association and ended with a threat. Failure to comply may result in fines and legal action. I stacked them, unanswered, in a kitchen drawer labeled compostable threats. Then came the spying. I caught Lynette and 2 board members standing on the HOA walking trail, phones raised toward my property like they were photographing a rare zoo animal. When I waved, Lynette dropped behind a maple tree. A week later, an animal control officer showed up. We got a report of neglected livestock, the officer said, eyeing my utterly spoiled fat chickens who were currently gorging themselves on watermelon rinds. Neglected, I asked. The complainant said your animals were living in dilapidated, non-code compliant structures. He read from his tablet. The chickens clucked indignantly from their very sturdy coop. After a thorough inspection, the officer shook his head. Everything's fine, he said. Honestly, I've seen 4-H kids with worse setups. As he left, he muttered that he hated HOA weekends. Next came code enforcement. Then the fire marshal. Then some poor junior planner from the county zoning department who looked about 12. All left annoyed, not at me, but at whoever kept filing reports. The county notices told a story. Each complaint came from the same address. The HOA office. Submitted by L. Harlow, representing the interests of Maple Ridge Estates. Fine, I thought. You want to represent the neighborhood? Let's see how far you're willing to take it. I read my deed. I read the zoning code. I read, in grim amusement, the entire Maple Ridge HOA handbook to understand how their minds worked. Buried in an old county ordinance, I found something beautiful. The Agricultural Heritage Preservation Act. It granted special protections to century-old family farms, including immunity from nuisance claims by adjacent residential developments, if the farm could document continuous agricultural use and historical significance. Crow Farm, established 1924. Year now, 2024. The ink on the 100-year designation might as well have glittered. I called a lawyer specializing in land use, a bespectacled guy named Miguel Arroyo who sounded delighted to have a client who wasn't a developer. You, my friend, Miguel said, are about to become every HOA's worst nightmare. Legally untouchable and mildly petty. Together, we filed for official heritage farm status. I dug up old photos, tax records, even a ledger my great-grandmother kept of egg sales in 1937. 3 months later, the county stamped it. Crow Farm, designated heritage agricultural property. With that, the game changed. Lynette didn't seem to get the memo. A week after my heritage designation came through, she escalated from annoying to criminally creative. I received a certified letter, this time not from the HOA, but from Maple Ridge Estates Architectural Control Committee Incorporated, some shell entity Lynette had filed with the state. Inside was a notice of non-conforming use. They claimed my barn violated pre-existing subdivision sightline agreements. They insisted that when the developer carved out Maple Ridge, they'd recorded an aesthetic easement over the Crow property, supposedly limiting future structures and giving the HOA oversight. Attached was a copy of a sketchy document, allegedly signed by my grandfather 30 years ago. The signature looked wrong. Too loopy, slanted the wrong way. My grandfather's arthritic scrawl had never been that smooth. I drove to the recorder's office. The clerk pulled up the official documents. No aesthetic easement existed in any of the county's records. The document Lynette sent me had never been recorded. It was essentially a fancy napkin with lies on it. Miguel nearly cackled when I emailed it to him. They forged an easement, he said. They're manufacturing authority over your land that doesn't exist. Meanwhile, Lynette started playing a louder game with the neighbors. At block parties and Facebook groups, she spun a tale. I was illegally expanding industrial operations. My old barn was a safety hazard that could collapse toward their property line. My new silo, still just blueprints pinned in my kitchen, was unpermitted construction she was working with law enforcement to shut down. A few frightened residents began emailing the county sheriff, demanding action. Lynette, sensing momentum, went for the big swing. She filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's office accusing me of obstructing community safety officers, threatening HOA board members, and constructing non-compliant structures in violation of subdivision rules. She attached her forged easement. She attached incident reports she'd written on HOA letterhead. She even claimed I'd brandished a tool in a threatening manner during a supposed confrontation near the walking trail. When 2 deputies showed up to talk, I was ready. Every inch of my property line now had clear, politely worded signs. "You are now entering heritage agricultural property," they read. "Area under audio and video recording." I wore a body cam. My cameras captured everything. The conversation with the deputies was calm, boring, and absolutely devastating to Lynette's narrative. They left with a copy of my heritage designation, Miguel's card, and a polite but firm explanation that HOA rules stopped at their fence line. But the complaint still existed. On paper. In the system. Miguel sat back in his chair. "Here's the thing," he said. "False reports to law enforcement are a crime. Especially when you're using forged documents to back them up. And she's doing it in an official capacity as HOA president. Can we nail her for it?" I asked. Miguel smiled slowly. "We can do better," he said. "We can document it. Then we can let Internal Affairs and the State Attorney General do the nailing." Thus, the trap. I applied for a permit to install a new grain silo and reinforce the old barn. All by the book. The county approved it. Stamped, signed, fee paid. Miguel quietly sent copies of every legitimate permit to the sheriff's office and the county attorney with a note. "If anyone tells you these structures are illegal, they're lying," it said. "Please route all HOA complaints to this address so we can track them for an ongoing investigation." Then I waited. It took Lynette 11 days. The night of the raid, I was halfway through bolting the silo braces when I saw the familiar glow of HOA-branded flashlights bouncing down my driveway. Behind them, a county cruiser, lights off but engine running. Lynette marched ahead, flanked by her board members. She was already talking before the cruiser even stopped. "Officers," she called. "Over here. He's in the act right now. This is exactly what we discussed in my complaint. Unauthorized construction. We need to shut this down before someone gets hurt." The sergeant stepped out, tired and wary. He'd been briefed. He knew about the heritage designation, the permits, and Miguel's emails. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "Evening, Mr. Crow." I nodded. "Evening, Sergeant." Lynette thrust a folder at him. "Here's the easement," she said. "This proves we have authority over changes to the property." He's been defiant, aggressive. "Ma'am," the sergeant cut in, "we've already." Before he could finish, Lynette strode past him and ducked under the yellow contractor's tape, heels crunching on gravel. "This area is dangerous," she declared loudly. "I'm ordering a stop work." "Ma'am," the sergeant barked. "Step back behind the tape." "Don't you raise your voice at me," she snapped. "I'm the legal representative of Maple Ridge Estates. You're here because I requested your presence." The second deputy, younger and visibly regretting his career choices, glanced at the porch, where multiple cameras were now recording the entire scene. He saw the blinking recording in progress notice. He saw the big envelope taped next to it. To responding officers, it read, "Re-permits and court order. Open before entry." "Sarge," he murmured, tugging the sergeant's sleeve. "We were supposed to read that first." They opened it. Inside were copies of my permits, my heritage designation, Miguel's letter, and a fresh court order signed that morning. The order, granted by a very tired judge, said law enforcement may not interfere with permitted work on Crow Farm absent clear evidence of danger. Any complaints referencing HOA easements are to be treated as disputed pending investigation. All interactions at the property are to be recorded and preserved due to an ongoing inquiry into potential false reports. The sergeant's face went pale. "Mrs. Harlow," he said carefully, "did you read this?" She waved an impatient hand. "I'm not here to litigate," she said. "You have your paperwork. I have mine." She pulled out her faux easement and brandished it like Excalibur. "This supersedes some farm vanity certificate," she said. "You need to arrest him for ignoring lawful HOA directives." The sergeant stared at her for a long moment, then spoke very quietly into his radio. "Dispatch, this is 12. Can you confirm if Internal Affairs and the county attorney are monitoring this call as requested in Memo C-217? The radio crackled back. "Affirmative. They're on the line." I almost felt bad. Almost. Miguel had warned the sheriff's office that tonight would likely be eventful. The sheriff, eager not to be dragged into an HOA circus, had agreed to loop in IA and the county attorney live, so no one could later claim confusion. "Mrs. Harlow," the sergeant said, louder now, "I've been instructed to ask you a very specific question." She shifted, suddenly less sure. "Which is?" she asked. "Are you, in your capacity as HOA president, asserting to law enforcement that you have a legally recorded easement granting you control over this property's structures?" "Yes," she said, chin lifting. "Of course. That's what I've been saying this entire time." "And are you aware that the county recorder's office has stated no such easement exists in their records?" Her mouth opened, closed. "It must be an administrative error," she stammered. "The developer promised." "So this document you're holding," he continued, "you're presenting it as official, knowing it's not recorded anywhere and that the supposed signing party disputes its authenticity?" "Are you interrogating me?" she snapped. "I called you here to deal with him." On the radio, someone cleared their throat. "Unit 12, County Attorney here. Please advise Mrs. Harlow that she is dangerously close to admitting to filing a knowingly false instrument and making fraudulent reports to law enforcement." The sergeant winced. "You heard the lawyer, ma'am." The shift was almost audible. Neighbors who'd gathered on the walking trail leaned in. Board members edged away from Lynette like she'd suddenly become radioactive. "Mrs. Harlow," the sergeant said, "at this time I'm going to ask you to step out of the work zone and remain here. You are not under arrest, but this interaction is part of an ongoing criminal investigation." "What?" she gasped. "He's the criminal. He's the one breaking rules." "Ma'am," he said, pointing at the permits, the heritage plaque, the recording notice, "his rules are backed by state law. Yours appear to be backed by stationery." The fallout hit like a summer storm. Within a week, Internal Affairs opened a formal case into repeated bogus calls from the HOA. The county attorney referred the forged easement and false reports to the state's attorney general. The local paper ran a front-page story. "Heritage farm owner says HOA tried to annex his land," the headline read. "State investigating forgery claims. Lynette tried damage control." She claimed she'd been misled by the developer. She claimed the forgery was an administrative misunderstanding. She claimed she never intended for law enforcement to treat me as a criminal. Unfortunately for her, the recordings from that night, and her prior complaints, told a different story. She had, in multiple instances, asserted legal control she didn't have, pressured officers to trespass on protected land, lied about me threatening her, and used her HOA title to bolster those lies. The state charged her with filing a false report, attempting to file a forged instrument, and harassment. They didn't haul her off in dramatic handcuffs. This wasn't TV. But she did have to turn herself in, stand for an unflattering mugshot, and sit through arraignment with 3 reporters scribbling notes. As part of her plea deal, Lynette was fined $12,000, sentenced to 120 hours of community service, and banned from serving on any HOA or neighborhood association board in the state for 10 years. When the judge read the sentence, Lynette's face went from red to white. $12,000, she repeated, her voice cracking. For trying to protect property values? The judge looked at her over his glasses. No, ma'am, he said. For harassment, filing false reports, and wasting law enforcement resources with forged documents. There's a difference. Lynette sank into her chair, hands shaking, staring at the legal papers like they were written in a foreign language she couldn't comprehend.